What's up everybody, Brett here, coming back at you with some more quick battles here on Total War Warhammer 2. Going to be playing as the Blessed Dread today, with Lokhir Fellheart as my lord choice. So it seems like every time I get into ladder and I queue up, if I do not take the Vampire Coast, my opponent will. So I don't blame people, it's the new DLC, it's exciting, people want to play with it, but it can make for somewhat stale matchups. But what I've been doing is trying to develop builds and army strategies that I feel like can defeat them. So, and this is what I came up with for the Dark Elves, and I think it was a pretty cool strategy, which is why I'm excited to show it to you guys. So I'm going to put it in slow-mo. So the main thing about my army, and I think the armies that you need to have in general to deal with the Vampire Coast, is to go wide. So I went as wide as possible with the Dark Elves. And another thing that you really want to have, and let's pause it before the battle gets too far underway, is shields. So you'll notice, let me go ahead and pull up the unit card for you guys. All of my units are shielded. So what I did was I essentially made three armies. Three completely detachable armies that, depending on how my opponent deployed, I could detach one or two and perform some sort of flanking maneuvers, but they are locked unit groups, and there's a front line of bleak swords, so silver shields. In combat, they will beat the standard zombie units of the Vampire Coast, and they'll beat the polearm variant as well. And behind them are the dark shards with shields. So the shields being very important against the gunpowder units, and I love how their animations where they put the crossbows over their shields. It's pretty sweet. So I have 6 bleak swords and 6 dark shards with shields in these 3 unit groups. I also have off to the flanks, and this is a unit that doesn't get used very much, but I think is going to find a nice home in this matchup. So it's the Dark Riders with shields. So they have bronze shields, not a lot of armor, but the ranged component of the Vampire Coast is all going to be heavy armor piercing anyway. So even if they had more armor, it wouldn't necessarily save them. But it's their speed. It's their speed that I'm looking for, their ability to get up and around and shut down things like carronades, of which my opponent has brought 2. Nicely protected, I might add, by 2 groups of polearms. But in addition to those 2 units there, I also have some others hidden in the forest. I have them stacked on top of each other. This is the bear-like spot that I could place them to get as close as possible to the potential start area of my opponent while still having them vanguard deployed. So on a different map, I might have put 2 groups in each corner and then collapsed in that way. But I expect if my opponents are going to bring artillery that they're going to protect them with polearms. But I have 4 of these guys, so that's a lot. Even if I have to sacrifice 1 or 2 to tie down some polearms, as long as I shut down the carronades and then start cycle charging into the front lines, I will be fine. Another good tool that the Dark Elves have is the Harpies, or are the Harpies I should say. So very cheap. They have excellent weapon strength. So if you can get them into melee with something like, they'll tear up Failbats, but one of the most abusable units in the Vampire Coast roster is certainly the deck gunners, the flying armor-piercing handgun units. And if you just throw these Harpies at them, they're forced to retreat, and while they're retreating, they can't fire at you, and the Harpies will just dumpster them. So keeping them somewhat behind my army to start with, just to see what kind of army my opponent was going to be bringing. And so here I also have a Sorceress with the Lore of Fire. So the Lore of Fire is good against units that regenerate, and there's going to be plenty of those on the other side of the battlefield. And stripping her down pretty much to a bear horse. Let's see if we can click on her. I also took Kindle Flame to increase fire weakness whenever we cast. Fireball is a very spammable spell. It's going to be good at targeting down large targets like Salastra Direfin on her Leviathan mount, as well as the Flaming Sword of Ruin, so giving us more weapon strength and missile damage. So the nice thing about my groups here is that if I cast the Flaming Sword of Ruin in the center of this formation, it'll hit in an AoE, and now my front line and my back line have increased weapon damage and missile damage. So that's going to be great, and that's going to be something that'll come in handy during the course of this battle. And then, of course, the gentleman we all want to see, Lokhir Fellheart. So the new DLC Lord, the Kraken Lord with his awesome looking Cthulhu mask, and his dual red swords from the land of Ind. I took him pretty stripped down, but I had enough gold to afford quite a few of his abilities. So let's take a look here. The Merciless Slaver. So he has, let's see if we can keep him in frame. There we go. He lowers leadership of the units around him, which is great because he's kind of a mosh pit lord. And against the undead, the lower you can get their leadership, the better, because it'll push them towards crumbling that much faster, and then they'll be that much easier to defeat. The Helm of the Kraken, one of his legendary items, gives him 9 melee defense, which is very nice against low-tier infantry units, as well as the ability to regenerate, which is what makes him such a good fighter in the pits. And you pair that with Dreaded Duelist. It's an activatable ability. It has a super low cooldown, 60 seconds, and it lasts for 22 seconds. So only a 38-second downtime there on this ability. It gives him 26 melee attack, 27 melee defense. It puts him in the huge numbers and makes him a pretty scary duelist. And if you pair that with Deadly Onslaught, which also gives him, most importantly, armor-piercing damage and weapon strength, if you pop these simultaneously in a duel against another lord, he's gonna do a ton of damage. He already has 450 weapon strength, 160 of which is armor piercing. And of course, like all Dark Elves, for those of you who aren't familiar, their racial passive is Murderous Prowess. So whenever we kill 601 units, or 601 units are dead, we're going to get this ability here, which gives increased leadership, melee attack, charge bonus, armor piercing damage, as well as vigor. So that's it for my build. Super wide, super cheap, and every unit in this roster is, in this army, is going to be very good at dealing with the army that I have here in front of me. So my enemy here, rocking 2 Fellbats out on the flanks. That could be good for mucking up a dragon. So I took the Blessed Dread, I believe is what they're called. Man, I just said that, now I can't remember. But I took Lokhir. So Lokhir has a dragon mount, a unique dragon mount called Maelstrom. And I didn't hide my Lokhir pick by going with the Dark Elf faction. I could have easily concealed this. But I like to play the faction of the lore that I'm playing. For me, it's just a lore thematic thing. So to counter a dragon, Fellbats are excellent. They can just kind of get up in their face and stop them from doing what they want to do. They're also very cheap, 350 gold, and they have pretty high melee defense. So they're annoying to take out for single target, for single entities, rather. They're pretty difficult. A front line here, and we can slow-mo it. A front line here of the zombie pirate deckhand mobs. Good armor piercing, super cheap. They last for a long time, and intermixed with, we have the Tide of Skjold. It's a regiment of renowned zombie pirate deckhand mob, and these guys here have perfect vigor and frenzy. So that's what separates them from the standard variant. So they won't get tired. They have increased leadership, so they won't crumble as easily. And frenzy is a nice ability as well on them, increasing their damage. And in the middle here, in the center, let's see if we have any more. We also have 2 units of depth guard. So the elite anti-infantry killers of the Vampire Coast. Their stats are super juiced. They regenerate in combat. They also have frenzy as well. But they're very vulnerable to armor-piercing missile fire, which we have brought in spades. So despite the heavy-hitting carronades as well as the deck gunners, who also pierce shields, which is worth noticing, as well as the fact that carronades ignore shields as well. So even with all of this heavy punching power, we have enough ranged units that if we focus fire these depth guard, we should be able to take them down quite nicely. So also a unit of handguns, worth considering. Now, had my opponent gone a little less heavy on the infantry, or had spent a lot less gold on a hero or a lord like Silastra Direfin, I would have expected to see a lot more gunpowder units. So the deck gunners are obviously a nice choice here. There's 2 units of them. Their ability to pierce shields is going to negate a bit of my strategy. I could honestly see going for more of them in favor of taking out the handguns. They also outrange all of the skirmisher units that the Dark Elves have, except for, of course, their artillery pieces. But if you're bringing 2 carronades, you should be able to deal with an artillery piece or 2 by simply counter-skirmishing. So last but not least, and just a few zombie deckhand mobs off on the flanks. But the big deal here is Silastra Direfin. up on her Rotting Leviathan mount. Super heavily armored, 150 armor. And armor-piercing spellcaster, so you look here, see the traits. They cost terror, which is not nothing. The Dark Elves, for the most part, are not immune to psychology when you bring lots of low-tier troops. She has a 10% physical resistance. And the spell she brought, she took Kiss of the Deep, so every time she casts a spell, she'll do a little bit of AoE damage to us. Tide Call is a nice cheap spell, tear-shaped breath spell that does a good bit of damage in a line, very cheap. Spiteful Shot, perhaps not necessary when you're bringing Carronades. They're already highly accurate. I would expect this to be somewhat of a useless spell. The magic damage, possibly relevant. There's no really ethereal type units on the Dark Elf roster, so she can summon Rotting Prometheans here. So that's going to be a super useful spell, and I think she'll cast 2 of those this battle. As well as Arcane Conduit to regen Winds of Magic. Song of Enthrallment is an excellent bound ability to her. Gives her her enemies in an AoE a minus speed debuff as well as minus melee attack. So helping to make her even more tanky than she already is. As well as her most unique ability, Ghosts of the Past. So it's a summon that brings out some damn Knight Errants who are ethereal. So that means high physical resistance. So when they take to the field, they almost always generate their value if they're microed correctly. You can actually summon them behind enemy lines and then charge into the rear of your opponent. So this Lord choice, I mean, she's got to be close to 3,500 gold, whereas Lokhir Fellheart, even taking some of his abilities that I wouldn't normally take, but I only took them because I had a bit of gold left over, believe it or not, after doing this completely wide build. He costs, I think, about 1,400 gold at this point, maybe 1,500. So less than half of what she costs. So she's going to need to generate some big value to make up for that. I think for the cost of Lokhir, plus maybe this entire group here, is how much you have to pay to field Salastra with that many spells. Moved up my Sorceress of Fire here, hoping to get some fireballs on Salastra Direfin, but she wisely moved back. So now we're going to take shots at what we can. We have maxed out Winds of Magic, or nearly at this point, so we want to start using some of it. And we're going to put a big fireball into the Depth Guard, so that took out 6 models. That's no joke, and they don't regenerate until they're in combat, so that's worth remembering. And at this point I'm scooting forward with my Cav on all sides. I retreated with my Harpies, and this is going to be a big thing this game. I retreated with them, and my idea was to keep my Sorceress on this excellent hill to give myself good line of sight for my fireballs, and then to protect her against any kind of Fellbat shenanigans. But my opponent never really came up here, and I ended up forgetting about my Harpies, which is bad form on my part, but it was fortunate for me that it didn't cost me too much. So we put a lot of armor-piercing missile damage on these Depth Guard, and we've made 3 little pockets here. And we're going to get a nice Flaming Sword of Ruin. So all of our frontline troops now have fire damage as well as increased weapon strength. We completely destroyed one of those units of Depth Guard. And Salastra is going to come in here into the front lines, and she's pretty exposed. And without her here in the back lines, I felt very safe to swoop in with my Dark Riders with shields and start getting into these deck gunners and these handguns. So I have enough units here to stop them. One of my guys is going to charge into the front and help break the tide of Skuld, and the other is going to break these pole arms. Now I don't have my ranged units on defend. I almost always put them on defend, but in these tightly packed formations, I didn't want them to be on defend because with their lower range, they're lower range than the Vampire Coast units. So sometimes you will need your ranged units to chase. And I know it looks like they're kind of getting into the front line, and that's terrible, but I'm going to be microing them pretty carefully in a moment. And we did crush all of the frontline units of our opponent. One of the Depth Guard actually managed to make it into melee, but we're going to be spreading out with our ranged units and getting them. They'll be crumbling pretty soon. So Rotting Prometheans getting summoned here, and they're going to help to crumble my Bleak Swords. Really nothing I can do about that. Salastra has taken a ton of damage from all of this crossfire. This is not where she wants to be. Also fighting Lokhir Fellheart with the Flaming Sword of Ruin. And in his, without any kind of mount, he's kind of difficult to make stick. So I think this is another case of units dropping orders. I certainly had him fighting Silastra Direfin, but when she moved, somehow he like dropped the order. So we're going to get him on the Fell Bats. And before she dies, luckily our opponent does get some more Rotting Promethean, so good for him. And some beautiful shots coming in from these Carronades, ripping into our sideways position Dark Shards with shields. So I'm going to be rallying my troops. Some of them have been routing thanks to all the summons. I didn't see the Damn Knight Errants go off anywhere. I don't see their ethereal bodies anywhere. But we're just using our Dark Riders to support some of our infantry in the back line. Obviously using them to tie down pole arms is not the best. But we've managed to push some of our infantry and some of our cavalry back here to shut down the Carronades. And with that, all we have left are the Rotting Prometheans. So definitely not microing my Harpies was a big misplay there. I think this game would have been over even sooner had I, while all of this was going on, just brought them to the rear to try and take down those Carronades earlier. Could have saved myself from taking some big shots. So Lokhir Fellheart put himself on Silastra Direfin, and he ended up being one of the main reasons she was chunked down so heavily. When you give him his buffs, and especially when you buff him also with the Flaming Sword of Ruin, his armor piercing went kind of through the roof, and that 150 armor of Silastra Direfin didn't mean as much to him at that point, so he was able to just kind of chew her up. As well as probably the real MVPs this battle were the Dark Shards with shields. So had our opponent brought a lot of gunpowder units, they would have been very resilient to that. But their ability to take out the Depth Guard, which are certainly very scary combatants in this matchup, was excellent. And the Bleak Swords, kind of the unsung heroes perhaps, able to trade very effectively with all of this low tier chaff units. I'm not sure what the meta is right now between the Dark Elves and the Vampire Coast. Maybe this build was in response to something that's very popular, maybe a lot of chariot play or cavalry or Code 1 Knights type play, lots of Harpies maybe. So I could see this being a very good build against something a little less cheap and wide. But anyway, guys, so that's going to be it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this. I think this is a great anti-Vampire Coast build, and that's how I'm going to kind of promote it when I make when I put this video up. If you would do anything different, if you have any ideas for tweaks, put them in the comment section below. Let me know what you would do. But I think just having the silver shields and having the armor piercing and having the fast moving flankers that honestly the Vampire Coast just can't compete with, as well as a Lord that I don't think anything on the Vampire Coast roster, any of the 4 new legendary Lords, for their cost can go anywhere near toe-to-toe with Lokhir Fellheart. So honestly, I like this build. I could see changing up the Sorceress Lore of Fire for maybe a different Sorceress, Lore of Shadows, maybe something like that, and just taking maybe Pit of Shades to be even more offensive. But I did get some good fireballs, and the Flaming Sword of Ruin also gave me a lot of punching power in those tightly packed 4-unit formations, which I thought was also pretty sweet. Had our opponent had an even more spread out army, or a wider army, having a front line that's very maneuverable, I could see being a great benefit. So we tie them down with the middle group, flank with the side groups, and before we know it, we've kind of like made a concave of armor-piercing Dark Shard fire around our opponent's formation. But the way this battle worked out, I thought it was quite well. Honestly, if I could do anything over again, I would make better use of my Harpies. I play more campaign than I do multiplayer. So Harpies are a unit that I don't usually take in campaign. So when I do take them in multiplayer, I'm always at risk of not remembering to micro them. And honestly, I wish I had more free time to play more multiplayer, because there was a time when, man, my micro was just on point. And I'm just kind of slowly getting back into that, because I do want to bring you guys quality videos. I don't want you guys to cringe whenever you see that I forget a unit. But this is, if you're not, super MLG best player alive, you're gonna have even your best games where you win, and you're gonna forget units. It happens to everyone. For those of you who watch other YouTube channels, I've seen it happen to pretty much every YouTuber out there who's very good at this game. So if this happens to you, don't even worry about it. At least we still took home the win. We came up with a new cool build, and we got to check out a new DLC lord. So thank you guys so much for watching. Like the video if you did like it. If you didn't like it for whatever reason, just hit the dislike button, I guess. Subscribe if you haven't already. A small YouTube channel. I notice every single subscriber that I get, and if you're new, put a message, put a comment down below. Tell me who you are, why you like the videos or Warhammer or whatever, and we can get to talking. You know, I only have 20 subscribers right now, so when I get a new subscriber, I'll remember your name. We can play some games together. I play several games with a lot of the people who have subscribed already, and we do some 2v2s and we do some other stuff in our free time. Sometimes I record them and they make it onto the channel. So if you want a chance to get onto the channel and see one of our games cast, yeah, give me a shout out in the comments and let me know who you are. We'll, add each other on Steam, and then we'll play some games together. So all right, guys, take it easy. Have a good day, and I will see you in the next one.